A time gone by. Life before comfort. Can you remember a time when hot water came from a kettle and privacy was something only the rich could afford? This isn't a scene from a black and white film, nor a chapter in a history book. It was everyday life for millions who grew up in working class Britain, a life of struggle, yes, but also of pride, purpose, and deep human connection. Long before central heating and smartphones, families lived in small, damp homes with thin walls and tin roofs. There were no en-suites or washing machines. Instead, there were tin baths by the fire, shared toilets in the backyard, and blankets piled high to fight the biting cold of winter. And yet, through all that, there was dignity. In every patched curtain and scrubbed doorstep, you found a quiet sense of pride. In every steaming cup of tea beside the coal fire, there was warmth, not just from the heat, but from each other. These weren't lives of luxury, but they were full of sound, smell, ritual, and resilience. Today, let us return to those narrow streets and smoky kitchens. Let us remember not just how people lived, but how they endured, and why, even in the toughest times, there was still something beautiful in the everyday. This is not a story of poverty. It's a story of strength, of families that made do and made meaning with very little. If you've enjoyed this journey so far, consider subscribing, not for numbers, but to stay connected to stories that still matter today. We share more than just history. We share heart. Behind every wall, the people who held it together. It wasn't the brick or mortar that made a home in working-class Britain. It was the people, ordinary, remarkable people. In most families, space was a word on paper, not in practice. Children slept head to toe, sharing narrow beds under mountains of blankets. Parents quietly mended socks by candlelight, often after a long day's work, their fingers still blackened from coal or oil. Walls were thin, but hearts were thick with love. And though money was scarce, values weren't. There was a silent code of pride that ran through every street, a kind of quiet discipline passed down through generations. Shoes were polished on Sundays. Clothes were mended until the fabric gave out. The front step was scrubbed each morning, not because anyone told them to, but because it mattered. Appearances weren't about impressing others. They were about self-respect. These weren't perfect homes. Ceilings leaked. Mold grew in corners. But the people inside refused to let hardship define them. You see, the strength of a community wasn't measured by the size of its houses, but by how its people stood by each other. A neighbor's misfortune was everyone's concern. If someone lost their job, meals would quietly appear at their doorstep. If a child was sick, the news traveled faster than any newspaper. Not through the internet, but through open windows and caring whispers. Much of this warmth is hard to explain to younger generations, not because they wouldn't understand, but because they haven't had to. Today's homes are warmer, life is faster, but in that speed, something has been left behind. Back then, love didn't come from gadgets or gifts. It came from showing up, from singing together during blackouts, from sharing a fire and a story when the nights turned cold. And perhaps that's why these memories still glow, even through the soot and struggle. Now you might be wondering why we revisit these old tales. It's not to romanticize poverty, far from it. It's to remember the resilience, the rituals, the relationships, because they built the foundation for so many of us. And in a world that often feels disconnected, their way of life offers something we might want to bring back. Before we move on to the heart of working class labor in part 3, ask yourself, when was the last time you knocked on a neighbor's door just to talk? When did your home last feel full? Not of things, but of stories. If these reflections stir something in you, then you're in the right place. This channel isn't just about looking back, it's about remembering what mattered and keeping it alive. If you've enjoyed this journey so far, consider subscribing, not for numbers, but to stay connected to stories that still matter today. We share more than just history. We share heart. Shift by shift, the work that built a nation. Imagine waking up before the sun and walking through fog-covered streets, lunch pail in hand, boots heavy with yesterday's grime. That was the rhythm of life for many working-class men and women across Britain for much of the 20th century. They weren't chasing careers. They were building survival. Factories, coal mines, shipyards, rail depots. These weren't just workplaces. They were lifelines. The shifts were long, the pay modest, and the conditions often dangerous. But the unspoken agreement was clear. You did the work, not just for a wage, but for the honor of providing. There was no room for complaint. You inherited your father's trade like you inherited your family name. And to leave a job, unless you had another lined up, was almost unthinkable. That sense of duty wasn't rooted in fear. It came from pride. Blue collars weren't a mark of being lesser. They were a badge of contribution. Every brick laid, every gear turned, every crate hauled was part of something larger. The rebuilding of a nation after war, the running of entire cities, the quiet power behind every well-lit street and moving train. But let's not pretend it was romantic. These were grueling jobs. The air was thick with soot, hands blistered, backs ached for decades. Accidents were common, sick days were rare. A single missed shift could mean a week without wages. And in many homes, that was the difference between dinner and hunger. Still, there was a rhythm, a sort of honor code. You showed up, you worked hard, and at the end of the week, that envelope with your name on it meant more than just money. It meant dignity. It meant continuity. Many of us today look at that lifestyle and wonder, how did they do it? The answer isn't simple, but perhaps it lies in the power of collective endurance. They didn't do it alone. You worked your shift knowing your neighbor did too. You came home exhausted, but so did everyone else. There was strength in shared struggle, and that made all the difference. We often hear phrases like the backbone of the country, but those weren't just words. Those factory shifts, those dockyards, those rail depots, they quite literally kept the nation running. They built more than infrastructure. They built culture, work ethic, brotherhood. And this is the moment many forget when we talk about the past. The true turning point wasn't just technological progress. It wasn't only about moving from coal to clean energy or from tools to touchscreens. It was a cultural shift when purpose started being replaced by productivity, when work stopped being about identity and became simply a paycheck, when machines got faster, but people grew distant. Today, in an age of algorithms and remote offices, it's worth asking, what did we gain and what did we lose when we stopped working with our hands and started working through screens? This isn't about nostalgia for hardship. It's about remembering what work once meant, how it shaped character, connected communities, and created rhythms of life that ran deeper than any job description. If you find value in stories like this, that honor the quiet strength of generations past, you're in good company here. We invite you to subscribe to this channel, not just to stay informed, but to stay connected to stories that still shape who we are. Because sometimes looking back helps us move forward with more clarity. After the struggle, how society changed and responded for years, Britain's working-class neighborhoods lived in a kind of suspended hardship. Tough, yes, but familiar. People knew their place, their neighbors, their daily rituals. It wasn't glamorous, but it was grounded. Then things started to shift. The post-war era brought promises of change, new policies, new housing estates, indoor plumbing, electric heating, and televisions slowly made their way into homes that had once relied on coal fires and tin baths. It seemed for a moment that comfort was finally catching up with the people who had long lived without it. But every step forward came with ripples. And not all of them were gentle. Entire streets were cleared under slum clearance programs. Rows of terraced houses, homes filled with generations of memories, were demolished and replaced by high-rise flats. Yes, these flats had modern conveniences, but they often lacked something less tangible: community. Gone were the doorsteps where neighbors gathered. Gone were the corner shops where shopkeepers knew your name and trusted you to pay later. Gone, too, was the feeling of belonging to a tightly woven web of people who shared your story. In trying to fix poverty, society sometimes fractured connection. It's easy to look at the past and romanticize it, but we should be honest. No one wanted to be cold, to queue for a shared toilet, or to bathe in used water. Progress was welcome, but in that progress, something subtle and irreplaceable began to slip away. You see, hardship often forces people together. Comfort, ironically, can pull them apart. As society became more mobile, families moved further away. Work shifted from factories to offices. Streets that once rang with laughter and arguments, and the clatter of kids' shoes became quieter, more private. And in that privacy, many found isolation. Mental health, once a non-topic, began rising in conversation. Loneliness became more common, especially among older generations. It wasn't that people had less, it was that they felt less seen. And yet, you'd still find sparks of the old spirit. A neighbor bringing soup when you're sick, children playing outside in summer, chalking hopscotch on pavement, a borrowed cup of sugar, a shared song at Christmas. These small things remind us that human connection doesn't need to be a relic of the past. It just needs a little space to breathe again. As we reflect on how society reacted to decades of deprivation, the lesson isn't just in policy or architecture, it's in people, how they adapt, how they hold on to what matters, even when everything else changes around them. Today, many of us live with more comfort than our grandparents ever dreamed of. But the question remains, are we richer in spirit? Do we know our neighbors? Do we care? If this reflection speaks to you, if you remember the smell of coal smoke in the air, the echo of voices through thin walls, or the feeling of safety in a noisy street, then this channel is for you. Subscribe today, not just for nostalgia, but for stories that help us understand who we were and who we might still become. Because sometimes the future becomes clearer when we remember the past. Lessons in the dust. What endured and what still matters? What do we carry with us when the walls come down, the homes are rebuilt, and the streets grow quiet? For the families who lived through Britain's working-class decades, the damp winters, the rationed meals, the shared warmth, the answer is clear. They carried more than hardship. They carried values. Respect didn't come from wealth. It came from how you stood tall in hard times, from how you swept your stoop each morning, even if the paint was peeling, from how you polished your shoes, even if the soles had worn thin. There was a quiet belief that dignity isn't given, it's chosen. In those small acts, sewing patches into coats, pressing curtains, sending your child to school with a clean shirt even when the cupboard was bare, a kind of unspoken resistance bloomed. It said, we may not have much, but what we have, we care for. That idea, that resilience is not just endurance, but intention, is one of the most powerful legacies left behind by working-class communities. You see, these were not people to be pitied. They were people to be admired. And it's easy today, surrounded by abundance, to forget how much discipline it once took to stretch a loaf of bread, to mend instead of replace, to make something from almost nothing. These aren't just survival skills, they're life values. Resourcefulness, self-respect, family before pride, and pride in the right things. Even now, in a world of convenience, fast fashion, and throwaway culture, there's something deeply grounding about remembering that kind of living. It wasn't perfect, but it was intentional. Every item in the home had a story. Every task had meaning. Every meal was earned. And let's not overlook the emotional inheritance either. Children who grew up in those homes often carried forward something more valuable than money: grit. They knew what effort meant. They knew how to wait. They learned that warmth didn't always come from heating. Sometimes it came from how tightly a family stuck together. We often measure legacy in physical terms: property, bank accounts, careers. But the most powerful legacies aren't seen. They're felt in how someone speaks, in how they love, in how they refuse to give up, even when the world gets cold again. So what have we inherited? Not the old walls, not the soot-stained kettles or rattling windows, but perhaps something better. The reminder that pride is not about appearance, but attitude, that a house, no matter how small, can hold a world of meaning, that we can still live with purpose even when life isn't easy. And maybe in remembering how people once lived, we can rethink how we live today. If that idea resonates with you, if you believe the past still has lessons for the present, then you're already part of this community. Subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, not for nostalgia's sake, but to keep these stories and their wisdom alive for the next generation. Let's preserve what mattered most. Echoes of the past. What do we carry forward? We've taken a long walk through streets that no longer look the same, past the soot-stained bricks, the flickering coal fires, and the sound of boots on cobblestones. And now here we are, looking back, but also quietly looking inward. Because stories like these don't just belong to history, they live in us. The world we live in today is faster, brighter, more connected than ever before, at least on the surface. We have warm homes, running water, endless digital distractions. But sometimes, amid all that ease, we lose touch with the weight of meaning that once lived in small things. A mother pressing a collar for school, a neighbor knocking just to check in, a child learning to be grateful for hot soup and clean socks. These were not just habits of another time. They were anchors to one another and to something deeper than convenience. We often say we're more advanced now, and yes, in many ways we are, but advancement comes with choices. And the question we must ask isn't just, what have we gained? It's also, what have we left behind? We've traded many physical hardships for emotional distance. We've gained comfort, but sometimes lost connection. We've expanded our spaces, but narrowed our sense of community. So perhaps the real lesson isn't to return to the past, but to remember what it got right, to carry forward the best of what it gave us: pride, grit, care, togetherness, and place those values into our present lives in new forms. A conversation at the corner shop instead of another online order, a shared meal instead of a quick bite, a moment of listening, truly listening, to someone who just needs to be seen. You see, the past isn't just a place, it's a mirror. It shows us who we were, yes, but also who we could be again, if we choose. Not everything from those hard years should return, but their quiet strength, their deep-rooted kindness, their resilience in the face of scarcity, that might be exactly what the future needs. So as we close this chapter and leave behind the rattling windows and steaming socks near the fire, let's carry something forward. Not just the memory, but the meaning. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a feeling, a longing, consider subscribing to this channel. Not because we dwell in the past, but because we believe the past still has something to say.